both me and the screen?
Yes. Yes, you can go right ahead. Welcome.
Good, thank you. Thank you all for being here this morning. Really appreciate the opportunity. Nara and I have gone over some issues that we were thinking about for today. And so before I get into that, I'll go through the Native American acknowledgement for you. And am I being loud enough, or is it?
Yes. You're good.
Is it okay? Okay. So I begin with the land acknowledgement, Native American acknowledgement, that I come to you from the land of the Puyallup tribe. We are located in Tacoma, Washington. The town that I live in is actually called Puyallup. We're just on the south end of Tacoma. I'm about 30 minutes from the church where I am serving as pastor quarter time. So I want to begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where I'm speaking to you from today is the traditional territory of the Puyallup people. The Puyallup, which means generous and welcoming people, are a Coast Salish tribe. They were forcibly relocated onto reservation lands into what today is Tacoma in late 1854, after signing the Treaty of Medicine Creek. Today, they have an enrollment of about 4,000 people, of whom 2,500 live on the reservation. The property where the Church of the Indian Fellowship is located is also on the reservation land and was established there in 1876. In 1975, they had, at that time, the tribe had their own lawyers by that time. They discovered that the land had never been paid for, that the Presbyterian Church was given the land by the federal government. It's probably the land that the church sits on, probably about maybe 3 acres, was given to the Presbyterians for a mission and never paid for. So in 1975, the church the national church returned the deed to the Puyallup tribe, and the tribe came at that same meeting. A moderator came out here, and at that same meeting, the tribe invited the Presbyterian Church, this congregation, to stay for a 99-year lease at $1 a year. So in 2075, the lease is up. But God has been good. Thank God for all those things. So the 3 topics that we looked at, Mara and I myself, begin with restorative justice and the rights of Indigenous peoples. Call to action, which the next 2 topics are slides that I had, you saw the last time. Calls for action, actions the Christian church can take after repudiating the Doctrine of Discovery. And then the inclusive church can make a difference, discussing the slide that I used last time as well. Traditional Indigenous practices of restorative justice and rights have much to offer the modern Native American community. The goal is to participate in restorative justice, gain understanding, number 1. Number 2 is repentance, prepares Christians for forgiveness and reconciliation moving forward. In 2007, the United Nations adopted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. That called into question the validity of the Christian Doctrine of Discovery, which for centuries served as legal rationale for stealing land and dehumanizing Aboriginal peoples, as well as justification for the establishment of boarding schools throughout North America to, quote, civilize, unquote, Indian children. The Declaration seeks to right historical wrongs through use of papal bulls of the Roman Catholic Church that are official decrees by the Pope sanctioning the seizure of indigenous lands worldwide. Treaties are regarded as binding, sacred, and enduring texts by American Indians and Alaskan Natives, comparable to the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Therefore, it is disturbing that the U.S. government ignores its trust responsibilities by violating treaties and other promises. Today, there are hundreds of tribal justice systems within the borders of the United States, which serve several hundred federally recognized Indian nations. What that means, federally recognized, means that those are what it says, that those tribes are recognized by the federal government and are deemed the nation-to-nation relationship. There are tribes, however, that are not recognized federally for various reasons. There is a process that the tribes must go through to get that acknowledgement. And so some of those tribes have not been able to either prove that documentation or are only recognized within their state. And sometimes it's the other way around, where the federal government recognizes the tribe, but the states will not. But obviously the federal government's recognition is the most important for working nation to nation, tribe working for federal government. For most Native American communities, a return to traditional concepts of justice represents a return of restoration of friendly relations, attitudes that parallel the growing mainstream interest in restorative justice that is going on within our country at this time. Tribal courts often operate under a dual justice system, one that is based on American philosophy of retribution, and the other which is based on indigenous philosophy of restoration. The American system is confrontational in nature. One of its primary goals is to impose punishment for violations of the law. This often involves the imposing of fines and separation from the community through incarceration. The indigenous philosophy, with a focus on restoration, seeks to harmonize the underlying conflict and restore balance to the individuals affected and the community at large. Under this system, the judicial works to restore relationship and heal lives. One of the primary goals of this system is the restoration into the community. American justice is based on rules and principles. Indigenous justice is based on human relationships and webs of connectivity back into the community. American justice is based on these kinds of things that are just foreign and have been to Native people since contact. James Zion, a former solicitor to the courts of the Navajo Nation, says this: the basic concepts of Indian justice are relationships, reciprocity, solidarity, and progress, and process, and understanding that what I do has an impact on you, and what you do has an impact on me. He goes on to say that the American system has a lot to learn from Native American concepts of justice. There's a clear association between restorative practices of contemporary tribal courts and traditional forms of indigenous justice. Restorative court systems often use a term of, a team of individuals who work with the parties to resolve the dispute. This is like the traditional system that consisted largely of a council or tribal elders or other assigned to assist. This form of justice recognizes that the offender will eventually be reintroduced into the community. And as a result, it seeks to heal the primary causes of the troublesome behavior to prevent reoccurrence in the future. Former Navajo Justice Ray Austin says that the indigenous courts are focused on restoring harmony and balance to the spirit of the individual who commits the offense, because it is believed that people who are whole do not engage in harmful actions in this way. You are also helping to restore balance and harmony into the community. This is a concept that the Navajo have a word for. It's hojo. Hojo means balance. There are 4 aspects to that. And each one of those aspects must be in balance to restore that person into the community. But if one of them is not, then you have issues and problems. And sometimes the U.S. governments or the concept of incarceration in this country does not lend to that kind of spirit. Each of these different forms of restorative justice provide an opportunity to bring balance and harmony to the entire community, something that's often lacking in American justice system. Restorative justice helps communities to view crime as more than an isolated criminal offense. It views it as a symptom of a larger problem, and it allows parties to find a lasting resolution to those problems so that they don't repeat them in the future. Here are 5 principles of restorative justice. Restorative justice operates around 5 basic principles, which are: number 1, crime consists of more than a violation of the criminal law and defiance of authority. Number 2, crimes involve disruption in the 3-dimensional relationships of victim, community, and offender. Number 3, because crime harms the victim and the community, the primary goals should be to repair the harm and heal the victim and the community. The victim, number 4, the victim, community, and offender should participate in determining the response to crime. It is believed that the government should release its monopoly over that process in order to make it more effective to the individuals involved. And number 5, case disposition should be based upon the victims and the community's needs, not so on the offender's needs or culpability. The danger that he or she presents or on their criminal history. The practice of restorative justice is becoming more and more prevalent. The increase in participation has caused some within the criminal justice system to raise a flag of concern. The primary concern has been with the inability to track restorative justice outcomes. Proponents argue that creating stricter guidelines that are focused solely on traceable outcomes will hamper the process, making it less likely that practices will be specifically geared toward the needs of the individuals involved. As tribal courts become more self-determined and sophisticated, it will be interesting to see the long-term role that restorative justice practices will have. In the end, the community will have to decide if they want to move their court toward a more Americanized structure, or if they want to decide on organizing their court system in alignment with the traditions and beliefs of the communities that those needs serve. There's an example of restorative justice that I wanted to share with you. It is up here in the Pacific Northwest. A young man committed a crime, and he was tried in a state court and convicted of the crime. The tribe stepped in at the sentencing and offered its restorative justice process to the case. And after explaining what would happen to the judge, the restorative justice process was given over to the tribe, and they were allowed to use their own system to reform, if you will, this young man. The young man was placed on an island, and in the Pacific Northwest here, many tribes, their reservation properties have many islands on them. This small island is equipped by the tribe with everything the young man would need: a home, a constant supply of food and water, and everything that he would need, except for communication with the outside. At that time, there were no cell phones, so that wasn't an issue. And obviously no telephone, no television, no newspapers, none of that. He could not have contact with anybody. And once a week, somebody would come by boat, refresh his supply of food and water, anything else he needed. And then the person would counsel with him. It was the time for him to seek understanding of what he had done, to seek understanding of how he had, what it had caused in the community, and especially what it had done to the victim as well as the family of that victim. Within a few months, the council finally agreed, a group was monitoring this, finally agreed that he was ready to rejoin the community. And the history of this particular case is that this young man never reoffended. He became a useful part of that community after that. And so this particular story has been held up as proof that an ancient system that tribes have used for generations still works today and still can work today. We move on to the next two slides are what I shared with you before in the previous presentations. And so we want to go back over them so that we can unpack it, as we say, a little bit more. All Christians are called to action. We all can learn how the doctrine of discovery affects all indigenous people throughout the world, not particularly just our country, the United States, but all indigenous people around the world. I would highly recommend that you take the time. I've sent Mara a list of resources for you to look at after this presentation. I would really encourage you to take the time to read the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And as you read that, understand that it's not just talking about or referring to Native Americans in North America or even South America. It's indigenous people around the world who exist, but we just don't ever hear about them. There are indigenous people who only make the news in other countries around the world if they're at war with their own governments, their own countries' governments, and those kinds of things. Lately, the Brazilian Native people have been making news because they have been successful in rulings against gas, oil, and other interests down in South America that have been eating up their lands, literally. But anyway, there are indigenous, to just remember that there are indigenous peoples around the world. You just don't hear about it. To recognize the doctrine's impact in news stories concerning indigenous people. Lately, those have been land back issues that have happened. Most recently, what's been going on in Oklahoma with the Cherokee, winning lawsuits down there of property that was taken from them illegally. Other tribes within the U.S. who have received land back from various sources, not particularly government, and those kinds of things. Those of European ancestry can examine possible colonial mindsets and that of society. This kind of presentation that I'm giving to you right now is one of these mindsets. It's technology. It's how we operate today. I am what's called an urban Indian. I did not grow up on a reservation. I grew up in the city of Phoenix, Arizona. My father raised 8 of us by himself after my parents were divorced. I was about 4 years old. And my father made sure, however, that we were connected to Native activities in Phoenix, where there's a huge Native population. And we went to powwow celebrations. We went to community activities that are happening, especially around the holidays, and all those kinds of things. And on the other hand, we went to a white Presbyterian church near where we live. My father was a Presbyterian minister, and so Sunday morning, we found all 8 of us and him sitting in worship or in Sunday school and those kinds of things. But that colonial mindset is how Americans live. You don't think about it that way, but it is. And some people say when there's an apology that's given to Native Americans, such as the Presbyterian Church did in 2016, that, well, I didn't do those things. I didn't put them on reservations. I didn't go to war with tribes. And that's hundreds of years ago. And that's right, that's true. But the land and the benefits of communities that you live in came from someplace. And it was those battles, it was those wars, it was that annihilation of Native people, it was that removal of Indian people from those lands. And so today, some of our states have no Native American people in them with regards to reservation because of those kinds of activities 200-300 years ago. That is the colonial mindset that we're talking about that needs to be recognized. And communities have done so. Your community, without you having Native American people in your congregation that I know, or in your area, is like many of our churches in the country, Presbyterian churches in our country. And so it would be easy to say, well, they're not in our area, so I guess we don't have to worry about it. But you are doing something about it, what I just explained. You're trying to learn something about what happened, trying to learn how to move forward and how to be in solidarity with Native people. Recognize Indigenous people in your local communities, as I said, and learn their history, or learn more about the Indigenous people of the area where you live now. And we shared, Mara and I, about your activities of late, what you have been doing, going and listening to people talk about Native American issues. And so you're doing exactly what that point is recommending, in recognizing the Indigenous peoples. Support the advocacy for justice, civil rights issues, and local educational programs. That could be doing that in concert with other tribes, with a tribe. Some of our churches in Oklahoma, for instance, Arizona, Pacific Northwest, states like here, particularly tribes in the upper Midwest, North and South Dakota. There are Native people everywhere. They're on reservation, and also like me, are urban Indians too. There's a lot to learn from Native people. But recognizing those people locally and learn about their history, or learn more about the Indigenous people in the area where you live now. Support the advocacy for justice, civil rights issues, as I said before. Those are ongoing. A lot of it has been ongoing. Visit Indigenous Peoples cultural centers and attend open events such as art exhibits, powwows, which are a moniker, if you will, for Native American celebration, and performances. Powwows are usually open to the public, and they're not isolated only to Native American people. Sometimes the powwow is in a community building structure, and so there's probably sometimes a fee, an entrance fee to get in. Some of the tribes in the West usually have their powwows outside in an arena, a grassy location. Some of the tribes even put up structures in a circle for people to sit and watch the dancing. And then the last thing on there is to reject the Doctrine of Discovery and its rationale. If you look at that Doctrine of Discovery and read through it, again, it is long. It is a lot to take in. But the structure of it is racist and all kinds of other things. And a lot of Native Americans wonder how on earth it can still be part of the legal system in this country. I've included in this slide, which I use again in my last presentation these things, but I want to just urge that you consider reading again that General Assembly repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery that I included in that resource listing for you. It's important for the church to understand, and if you need to just have a time where, and what we're doing right now, have a discussion about those questions. That is a way to get the ball rolling, as it were. On the other hand, you've already done that, as Mara has shared it. The colonial mindset examination is a useful time when the church could explore the privilege that you enjoy and how that has come or not at the expense of indigenous people who once inhabited the area. The indigenous people that lived in Pennsylvania, the Delaware, the Shawnee, the Iroquois, and the Susquehanna. The Delaware were the largest and most powerful tribe in the region. The Shawnee lived in the west of the Delaware and were frequently at war with them. The Iroquois lived in the north of Delaware and were also frequently at war with them. The Susquehanna were a small tribe that lived south of the Delaware. Just some items to think about as you do your own studies, either individually or together as a group. And if there's any questions that or issues that you would like me to help with, I'm a Zoom call away, as we say. And I'm always willing to do that. It's part of what I do as the Associate for Native American Intercultural Congregational Support. And I enjoy that work, working to try to help folks, not just Presbyterian, but folks everywhere, to understand a little bit more about the issues that face Native American people. This slide is representing the inclusive church and how the church can make a difference in our communities. Partner with a Native American congregation, meet at a neutral location with Native leaders to find out ways that your congregation or organization could work with a Native congregation that wouldn't be seen as a one-way relationship of assistance. Often what that means is that in the past, we used to, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of missionary barrels. They used to have a barrel literally in the church where people could drop off used clothing or other things. And then once it was full, they would be taken to a local tribe, a reservation, and like that. So those are called missionary barrels. Those days are gone. There's nothing wrong with helping tribes, groups, a family, if you want to adopt a family, as it were, and helping in that way. But that's a model of assistance and help, mission, if you will, that is a little outdated. And what I encourage churches to do when they contact me, I was contacted this week by a church in the U.S. that wanted to help and go through. They're in Denver, and their youth group wanted to go to Crazy Horse Memorial that's being carved out of a mountain near Mount Rushmore. And they wanted to know if there were any churches between Denver and the memorial, the Crazy Horse Memorial, that they could visit on their way and help. And that's the proper way that we look at, would recommend that churches use. Because then I can make that contact, which I have with 2 churches in South Dakota, and they await the decision of that congregation on which one of those churches they want to visit. And so once they do make that decision, then I will contact the congregation, the leadership there, and make the introduction, and then they will exchange contact information and begin their plan. That is a good way to work in partnership, not just the missionary bearer, but in partnership with Native American community. A lot of time also what happens is congregations or presbytery offices or groups will give outdated, old, leftover curriculum to Indian congregations, Native congregations. Again, that's a fine way to help because those materials are very expensive, as we know, and most Native congregations cannot afford them at all. And so it's a good way to help a congregation. But there's, again, partnering with the congregation so that they have the actual up-to-date curriculum would be another way to do that. Because a lot of times the people in the congregations don't know how to use a particular curriculum. And they come with many things, auxiliary things to teach with that they don't understand how to use. So that's just kind of a tip, if you will. Again, number 2, consider arranging your youth mission trips to focus on Native Americans. It's curious, I guess is the word I would use. When I hear the national church or presbyteries or other groups planning to go here and there and everywhere, except inside the borders of our own country. They'll go to Mexico because they can drive if they're over in this part of the country. They can drive down there, and many have. My own niece is a Baptist, and she lives in Kentucky. And her youth just went to Guatemala, and they helped down there and did wonderful work. I've seen the pictures. But at the same time, it makes Native congregations here, not just Presbyterian, but across the spectrum, wonder, well, we can use that kind of help too. And so we often wonder why they don't look in their own backyard as it before making those kinds of arrangements. And again, considering those kinds of groups, and that's what I do. That's why I just explained to you how a congregation has gotten a hold of me to make those kinds of arrangements. And so I encourage, on the second part of that, number 2 is to contact the Native American Intercultural Congregational Support Office, that's me, who can make initial contacts with Native leaders to find the best fit for your youth and Native congregations. Number 3, partner with Native American congregations to offer training for elders, deacons, youth workers, and clerks of session. This type of training is greatly needed locally, so distant travel, which can be very expensive for these congregations, is not necessary. Again, I do a lot of this already, but I can't be everywhere. I'm just one person. And so I try to do those in regions where more than one congregation can send delegates to as well. But these types of training are not, the ones I mentioned, that are not done frequently. And so we have elders and deacons particularly in Native Presbyterian congregations who never receive training at all. And sometimes if you ask the question, what does an elder do? What do you do? They don't really know because they've never gone through any types of training. And that in the last 5 months since the first of the year, if I could be everywhere that training is needed, I'd probably be on the road at least once every other week. There's that much to do. And so I'm working on some regional types of training. But if a congregation, if a presbytery could consider offering that type of training to Native Americans, that would be fantastic. Number 4, include Native Americans in presbytery, synod, or clusters of churches, worship experiences such as Pentecost today, pre-Thanksgiving worship services, summer picnics, workshops, and other gatherings as a way of fellowship with Native Presbyterians and not for diversity's sake. November is a very busy month for me. You can imagine. It's the 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, and all of a sudden, congregations, presbyteries, whoever, and the national church too, get really involved in wanting information about Native Americans. But we're here the other 364 days of the year. We're out here. And so I always encourage congregations who want this kind of discussion, or my inclusion in these kinds of discussions, to consider doing it at other times of the year as well. And by that way, equipping the congregation or the presbytery, if you will, in working on learning more about Native Americans, and not just in November. Number 5, consider offering financial gifts to national conferences such as Native American Presbyterian Women, Native American Presbyterian Men, and the Native American Youth Conference, which is held triennially each. And this is an old slide, as you can see, because it says the next one is in 2020, but it is actually in 25. The honorarium that your church gives to me for this workshop in the past, and one in the past, goes directly to the American Indian Youth Council Fund that we have at the National Church. Those funds are used to help with the planning and implementation of that youth conference, which usually gets about 75 youth from National Church all across the country. And this coming one in 2025 is slated to take place here in the Tacoma, Washington area. The Presbytery owns a camp, which is located on the Puget Sound in a wooded area as well, and they will be there for about a week. So, just some suggestions. The Native American Ministries consultation. Again, this is a day that I need to change my dates there, but we're working on that for next year as well. And scholarship for attendance at General Assembly. That one is, I understand that the only people that are going to be at the General Assembly in Salt Lake City at the end of June are going to be the delegates. I serve as a resource person, and so I will be meeting on the committee side of it all, but it's by Zoom. So not many people are attending anything. That gone are the days of the exhibition hall. A lot of people were very upset about that. And the dinners that groups used to offer, presbyteries used to offer, seminaries used to offer. The Native American Consulting Committee also used to have a dinner as well. But number 6 is listen. God gave us one mouth and 2 ears for a reason. Native Americans have much to say and share about their experiences, faith, and relationships, not just locally, but beyond that as well. It's helpful for congregations to find out more about Indigenous people who once inhabited your areas. Seek Indigenous gatherings in your area again, if possible, for you to attend. One useful tool also is YouTube. When you can find those tribes, particular tribes, and watch celebrations that they now have, though probably in different places than they originally inhabited. One in particular that I would recommend is called The Gathering of the Nations. It is a powwow. It is the largest powwow in the country. Thousands of participants come to that. And it's local. It's usually held in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at an arena, and it is packed. There's people who sell Native American arts and crafts. There's Native American food for sale. It's just a gigantic village, if you will, for a week down there in Albuquerque. And they not only stream live the activities there, and it's held the last week of April. And so I can watch it from here all day if I wanted to. But it is a good resource to look and see what a powwow is, like how it works and those kinds of things. Also, find out more about the National Congress of American Indians and the advocacy work that they do with and for the indigenous tribes. Many Native American Presbyterian churches look and seek contact, working with community partnership with congregations, not just Presbyterian either. And so that's also something to keep in your mind. Listen and be attentive, not only to God's calling in you about these matters, but also ways that you can partner with Indigenous people. It's just not monetary resources that you can help with, but being an active participant in their lives as well is very helpful. Thank you. I'm going to turn this over now to a time of Q&A, questions and answers, if you wish. But again, I want to urge you to look at that resource page that I sent so you can get more information, or ask me. You can also send an email asking if there's something in particular, materials that you're looking for.
Thank you so much, Reverend Porter. And just so all of you know, the resource page is linked to the recording of this session, so you can access it there. So any questions?
Questions?
A question. Thank you so much, Reverend Porter. This was amazing. Is there any, I was intrigued about the tribal justice system, and the example you shared was from, I assume, a couple decades ago, based on what you said about phones. Do you know if there's anything today in the US or other countries that have adapted and are using that to kind of bring it more mainstream into their own justice systems, or even states? Like, that's the first question. And then the second question on that is, in the US, like, was there ever sort of a value to that system and then we've diverged, or have we always kind of been at odds with our historical indigenous tribal justice pathways, and like bringing in the police in our justice system that was sort of around rounding up enslaved people that have escaped?
Good question. Restorative justice has always been part of tribes and how they operated. When before the reservation system was established, before tribes were forced onto reservations and had to give up their, sometimes tribes were nomadic and roamed from season to season to different parts of their territory for different reasons. Some tribes in the Southwest were not nomadic, And so they had permanent dwelling and like that. And so you got that across the country with the 577 tribes that are federally recognized. And there are hundreds more that are only state recognized. So you're talking probably closer to over 1,000 tribes that exist in our country. Each tribe had their own system and ways of justice. Yes, sometimes it was death. It was a death sentence, a life for a life, I suppose. Sometimes it was not. And other times, banishment, but you had to leave the tribe or the community, if you will, the band of that tribe. You had to leave, and you were no longer welcome there. That was the worst. That was worse than death. Being isolated from your own people. There's many times when I tell the story, explain the situation, that Native Americans, pre-colonial days, had their own system of Social Security. Never did a widow, especially with children, suffer because of the loss of the father, the husband, the leader of that family, for various reasons, war, disease, whatever. The tribe was there for them, and relatives and all that, and that's why we're so impacted by relationship, our families, and not just brother, sister, mother, father. These are extended families. I'm an amateur genealogist for my mother's side of the family, who are Nez Perce from Idaho, and Norwegian English. So I've looked and have done research on our ancestors. And so it's a way of, modern way, of using tools to find out who those ancestors were, because it brings them to Pima, keeps them in our lives. So those systems that tribes have had, ancient systems that tribes have used, were discounted once the reservation system was established by the federal government. The native folks could not, the tribes could not practice those restorative justice ways any longer. They were forbidden. If somebody murdered the government's judicial process, just like it is today. The federal government works with tribes when there is any crimes such as murders or victimization of any kind to another person. Those are federal offenses. And so the federal government steps in, the FBI does the investigations and all those things. The tribal government has its own police system, judicial system. And so for those other crimes that don't reach the federal level, those are handled by their own court systems. And early in the last century and into this century, a lot of tribes didn't have a lot of expertise in doing those things any longer, because they have lost now their ability to practice their own way of justice, their own restorative justice, ancient ways. They're coming back. And I explained to you in that example, that tribe up here in the Pacific Northwest that has had and used and never lost their ways of restorative justice in those kind of cases. I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Was there ever like a kind of collaboration in the colonial United States thinking about that restorative justice? Or was it just kind of, it's outlawed we've moved on, we're gonna put in our own justice system that has nothing to do with restorative justice that was here before.
Yes. That basically is what happened.
Okay.
There was no interest, just as there was no interest in saving Native American languages or cultures. When the boarding schools were established, there's also no interest whatsoever by the federal government and the church, who were very instrumental in working side by side with the federal government and all these things to civilize Indians. They didn't want to hear it. There was no interest in the customs of the tribes, whatever, particularly when it comes to restorative justice issues and those kind of and criminal things that go on. The native tribes have had to work to restore language, work to restore schools that train their own children, and all those things, but also then the judicial processes, the governing processes that were ancient to the people before the reservation systems came along, and everything was thrown out by the government as useless. That's native, we're not interested in hearing about it. But tribes today are changing that and coming back into their own training. Many of them have lost it. They lost the customs, they don't know what they were any longer, and so they do the best that they can. But structures of all tribes are not the same. You have some tribes who have tribal systems in place still for governing themselves, and you have other tribes who do not and have lost that sense, and so now are using the federal system of government. For instance, the Nez Perce, in Idaho, their council is made up of 9 people elected. 3 of them are up for election every year. They just finished about a month ago with their elections. And so they now have a 9-person council. It's called the Nez Perce Executive Tribal Council. So they govern, but they do not have a legislature, as it were, in the federal sense. They do have a large meeting twice a year where the people, open mic, can come and express their discontent or their urging of new ways of doing programs to do whatever. And those go on for about 3 days. But, so that's one system. That's an example of a tribal system of where the chiefs from the various bands of the tribe that were scattered throughout the north central Idaho, northeastern Oregon, and eastern Washington state. That was the territory of the Nez Perce people at one time. A tribe that does not do that is the tribe that I'm enrolled in. I am Pima, Tohono O'odham. Those are 2 tribes from Arizona, my father's people, and they're like cousin tribes. The language is very similar. And then the Nez Perce. The Pima tribe is called the Gila River Indian Community. And the reason for that it's not called Pima is because there are 2 tribes who occupy that reservation. The federal government put the 2nd tribe there, and they're called Maricopa. And they were from the Colorado River area near what is south of Las Vegas now. They were moved to that reservation in the 1880s or something like that. And so it's called Gila River Indian Community because it's not particular to Pimas, but they are the overwhelming tribe. But their system of government is federal. They have a judicial, they have a legislative, and they have an executive, whatever. And so the person who heads the tribe is elected every 2 years, and that person is called the governor of the tribe. Some tribes use the word chairperson, or whatever, and rarely do you hear them use the word chief, because that is not a title, a position that many tribes use. It was the white system that was brought in during colonialism. But so they work like the federal government works, and their legislator is the most important because the people are, the tribe is, the reservation is broken up into regions. They call them districts. And so there's 7 of them. There's 8 actually, because the one that's for people like myself who don't live on the reservation, it's called the Urban Members Association, UMA. For short, it's UMA. And so they have a budget from the tribe and all these things. So each district sends representatives to the council. And so it works much like our Congress does. And so you can see that type of government works very well and has